thank you and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join today's session. I really appreciate you being here. I know how difficult it is to break away a part of your day to join these types of webinars, but you're here in the right place. Really going to be informational today and take you through soup to nuts, how you can save some money with your M365 investment. And so, as I just mentioned, we're going to walk through a very timely and practical topic, which is how to reduce that licensing cost ahead of your next renewal, wherever that is. And so the timing of this conversation really matters. Obviously we're late in the fiscal 26 of Microsoft. Many of you, I'm sure, know that the pricing is going up starting July 1. And at the same time, what we consistently see is many organizations are already overpaying before that increase even hits. And so the goal today isn't simply to react to higher prices, but really to actually step back, examine and fix that underlying issue so you're not carrying unnecessary cost into that next renewal cycle. And so by the end of today's session, you should have a very clear idea as to where savings exist in your environment and some opportunities and options for you to go and action that right away to help defray or potentially eliminate some of those costs as you progress to that renewal date. And so, what I want to talk about here, and before we jump into the content, is to give you some quick context as to who we are and why we're speaking on this topic. Creospark as an organization was founded in 2017, and from the beginning, we've been focused entirely on Microsoft technologies. Over that time, we've worked with more than 750 customers across a wide range of industries, primarily including regulated sectors like public sector, healthcare, legal, and nonprofit. We have over 120 individuals on the team, including over 35 dedicated technical delivery specialists. Our leadership team is made up entirely of Microsoft MVPs or former MVPs, which is a differentiator. It means that we stay very close to the platform and how it involves, and we bring that skill set and that knowledge and expertise to our customers in each and every interaction. The reason I share this today is because everything you're going to hear comes directly from our hands-on experience. We're inside these environments every day. We're helping organizations modernize, but also, and I'd argue more importantly, we're helping them clean up and optimize what they're already paying for. And that perspective is what really is going to shape the conversation today that we're going to have. And so, as we progress through this, I wanted to spend a moment to just talk about at a high level what Creospark does. And this is the work, the work that we do spans several key areas. And so first, we help organizations with modern work. And what I mean by that is collaboration tools like Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, and obviously now Copilot to help drive productivity and ultimately improve that customer experience. We focus heavily on secure cloud environments, including endpoint management, identity, overall governance, and other areas really to make sure that organizations are protected and compliant. We support process transformation through tools like Power Platform, Dynamics, and data platforms like Power BI and Fabric, really helping organizations automate, gain better and quicker insights, and ultimately get to the end of the job faster. Finally, we provide managed services and ongoing support. These include elements like monitoring, optimization, and financial governance, most of which we're going to discuss here today. Now, licensing actually sits across all of these areas, right? It affects costs, it affects security, it affects whether people can access the tools and use them efficiently. And so when we talk about licensing today, it's not at all a procurement topic. I mean, typically that's where it's domained, but it really cuts across the entire Microsoft strategy from any organization, from a SOHO office to an SMB through mid-market and all the way up through large enterprise. And so, before we go any further, just a couple of quick housekeeping items to help get you the most out of today's session. If you have questions at any point, feel free to drop them in the Q&A panel. We may not get to it contemporaneously, but we should have time at the end of the session to address those. But we'll keep an eye on those throughout, and if we can weave it into the response into certain content, certainly will today. And again, we'll address as many as we can at the end of the session, but there will be successive follow-ups after this, and we'll be sure to encapsulate any follow-up or questions that we couldn't get to today. You will also receive a recording of today's session along with some additional resources and materials. So please, focus the next, 54 or so minutes on the content today. Don't worry about capturing anything in the moment. We've got your back in that regard. And lastly, there is a small survey and a giveaway at the end. So please do, if you can, stay through the entire session so you can participate in that. And so with that, let's jump in. I'll keep this brief for context, always important for an introduction. My name is Jeff Schwalm. I head up the sales efforts here at Creospark. My background is in sales leadership, in technology consulting. And over the past several years, my focus has really been predicated upon helping organizations align their M365 investments to real and tangible business outcomes. That includes things like licensing optimization, security posture, and increasingly AI adoption as organizations start to roll out Copilot. And what this means practically is that I spend, a lot of time in conversations, just like the one we're going to have today, helping organizations understand what they're paying for, what they actually need, and where the gaps are between those two elements. And so, by way of an agenda, let's talk about the structure today. So we're going to talk about, from a forefront, about what's actually changed in Microsoft 365 licensing, really just to ground us in the current reality. Following that, we'll move into what I would call the bigger problem, right? And that is, where most organizations are already misaligned before any price increase gets applied or is even conjured. We'll talk through the 5 most very common patterns where organizations tend to overpay, and it's a lot. I'm sure, for the folks in the call, you're going to see a lot of commonality in your own enterprise because they're very, very, routine and common to customers that we see. After that, we'll talk about where savings actually exist, how organizations go about capturing those savings in a practical and meaningful way. Lastly, we'll close with some very clear next steps. So we'll arm you and equip you folks with, actions and behaviors and mentalities that you could immediately go and bring them to your company and take effect. Obviously, Creospark and our relationship with Microsoft is here to add advisory services, expertise, and be there in your corner for this. And so very much designed to move from the contextual to something that is immediately actionable today. And so here's the poll, just to help ground our conversation. Want to just take a quick pulse from the group. Everyone has different reasons and rationale why they may be here today. And so it really helps to anchor that conversation into what's actually relevant for you. And so you'll see the poll being posted in the chat there. Feel free to just go and click through that and submit your answer. And so, the question is, what is putting the most pressure on your M365 cost today? Is it renewal timing, the cost increases that are coming in a matter of days, a lack of visibility, too many licensing, Copilot expansion? There's a number of reasons and probably, a whole host of others that aren't included here. So I'll just pause for a moment and let folks read through that question and add their answer. Cool. Looks like we got most of the responses in. A few look to be coming forward, but it is really helpful. And honestly, I see a mixed bag of this. It's pretty much what I expected, right? This is really common throughout the market, and there's a number of pressures, but all of it creates a catalyst for you to be here today. And you'll notice those pressures aren't usually existing in isolation. Cost increases expose visibility issues. Copilot introduces new licensing decisions. Renewal timing forces everything to happen quicker or potentially on an accelerated timeline that may not have been planned. And so what we're going to do today is through this, we're going to go back and connect some of these pressures to some of these specific actions you take. So the folks who are talking about renewal timing, cost increases, and Copilot expansion, you're going to be covered. Lack of visibility and too many licenses, we'll absolutely address that today also. So thank you for that. Every dollar matters, right? Most organizations first hear about a price increase, and the instinct is to react. CFO starts asking questions. IT scrambles to understand the impact. People start thinking about renegotiation or cutting licensing or cutting functionality. But here's the reality, right? And it's really quite simple. Before you can make any smart decision about pricing, you really need to understand what you are actually paying for today. And in most organizations, and it may be a surprise to those in the call, That clarity doesn't generally exist. Licenses have been layered over times, right? We look at the scenario. Teams have changed. People have come and gone through an organization. New and different tools have been added. Very rarely has anyone at many organizations actually taken a step back, put their hand up, and said, "Hey, like let's take a look at this," right? And so when prices go up, what you're really doing is increasing spend on top of that existing inefficiency that I mentioned just now. And that's part of the problem, the biggest part of the problem that we're trying to solve today for our customers. And so, with that in mind, with that context there, let's talk a little bit about what has actually changed, because that's obviously very important, right? And there's a few key elements to understand here. First, like obviously, and as I'm sure you're all aware, the pricing is increasing, but the impact is not uniform. It really depends on what SKUs you have, how you purchase them, when your renewal comes due, and when it takes place. Second, I'm sure many of you heard we did a webinar on this a few weeks back, and so we'll have that as an asset for you to click on and consume if you weren't there in that session. But Microsoft introduced a new E7 tier, which sits above E5. That really changes how organizations need to think about licensing at the higher echelons of that spend. Thirdly, renewal timing determines when you actually feel these changes. If you were to renew a couple of months ago for 3 straight years, the price changes articulated today wouldn't necessarily be seen until the end of your term, be it 1 year or 3 years, right? But many customers are in a situation where they have no choice. The renewal is spending past that July 1 date. And so the timing is a very strategic lever in terms of how you go and interpret that, and the types of conversations you have with the Microsoft account teams and ultimately your reseller. Lastly, the extended service term. There used to be a grace period that existed with 365 renewals on CSPs. As of May 1st, that doesn't exist anymore. And we'll talk about this as we go through today's session. But the key here is that if you do not renew properly, you either could lose access to your licensing or pay a premium to maintain that. Neither of which is a great outcome, and these are two things that Creospark can help mitigate or otherwise ameliorate for you as you go through this. And so when you look at the price increases, right, you see, as I mentioned, they do vary significantly. Frontline worker licensing, like the F1 and F3 plans, are seeing increases in and around the 25 to 33% range, and that's what you can see in the bottom right corner of your screen. The business plan, so top left, business basic, standard premium, they're increasing as well, and while the percentages may look a little bit smaller, the total financial impact is still pretty meaningful when you multiply it out across hundreds or potentially thousands of users in your environment. And so even while that percentage at times can feel modest, the absolute dollars aren't when you start factoring in the per user cost and the monthly cost of those changes. And so at the same time, obviously it's important to recognize that Microsoft is adding value, right? It's not just a isolated price increase with the same product stack. There has been enhancement, there has been changes. Microsoft is adding value to the stack. And so we look at new AI capabilities, improved security features, expanded analytics across the platform. And the issue, frankly, isn't whether or not value exists. The issue is whether or not your organization is actually using those capabilities, and that is the linchpin. Because if those features aren't deployed, or they're not adopted, or they're not being used, the value becomes theoretical, but the cost is very, very real, right? And so it's really important to make sure that we can hit upon those areas and make sure that you're not overspending or over licensing specific users in your environment. So teased out E7 a bit. It is the new top tier offering. It, at a high level, essentially bundles Copilot, advanced security and governance into that single SKU that we've seen with E5 and E3. And the idea here from the Microsoft perspective is really to provide a simplified model for organizations that are going all in on AI, or are already operating at a high level of maturity, right? And that's where you start hearing terms like frontier firm being thrown about, right? That is where this is designed for. But most organizations today, as we all know, right, the economics rather don't quite make sense. And it's because not every user in that environment is ready to use AI at that scale. And so at this stage, it's really something to understand. It's something to be aware of, versus rushing out and licensing every one of your users on this technology stack today. For some customers, it makes sense. For most, it doesn't, right? There's a judiciousness aspect that needs to be prominent there. Cool. And so, going back to the why, like to understand why this is happening, you need to look at really three forces, right? And why Microsoft is increasing these prices. First is that AI infrastructure is expensive. Microsoft is clearly investing heavily, and we see that on our news feeds, on many new data centers across the US, across Canada, and globally, to add more compute and more capacity. Secondly, the security stack within M365 is growing significantly. Microsoft has added significant investment, increasing capability, increasing the levers of protection through zero-day attacks or threat vectors or EDR and XDR, adding real capability, but with that capability comes additional cost, right? And that is a portion of why these costs are increasing. Lastly, Microsoft is shifting from individual SKUs to bundled models. This changes ultimately how pricing is structured, right? There is a break-even points on any of these E3, E5, E7 versus the component level. Depending on what you're buying, depending on who's using it, it may make sense to buy those components. But on balance, they're priced where most customers are going to be at that break-even point where buying that suite makes sense. Creospark has the expertise, the scale, and the ability to go and help you analyze that. And so if that is a burning question or concern for your organization, we will have contact details at the end of this slide today. I and my team are happy to talk to each and every one of you on your specific situation and scenario to help make sure that you're spending at the appropriate levels and licensing again at the appropriate levels. And so, again, right, we're talking about changes, we're talking about new rules, and one operational change that's really important to understand is what happens when the subscription expires. And so a couple of slides ago, I talked about EST and the grace period, and here's really the meat of that, right? Previously, we all know there was grace period. You could renew your licensing sometime after it expires, still have access to all the tooling, still have access to all the license. Really no difference from a price perspective for you or a functionality or feature perspective from your end users. And so today, well, not today, I mean effective today, because it happened May 1st, that grace period no longer exists. And so now customers have three options. And to put it bluntly, you renew on time, you cancel your licensing, or you do nothing and move into a paid extended term. None of these options are overly palatable. Nobody should be working with a partner that believes those things are okay. And, this moves the criticality of the renewal planning more to the forefront because, frankly, with these changes, there is just less room for error. There's less chance for procrastination, and nobody wants to see you paying more for what you were paying significantly less for without an uplift in features or functionality. And so if you're in this situation, if you're in a bind, again, contact our team. We'll be happy to help you and get you on the straight and narrow and make sure that you're avoiding, some of the challenges that are inherent in this. So at this point, right, we have a choice in how you respond, right? We look at price increases, we look at the calendar in terms of functionality increases. And so the most common approach that we see customers have is simply to absorb that increase, adjust that budget and move on. And that feels really easy at the moment. It's a quick way to get through that, but over time, the issue compounds, right? We talked about unused licensing, we talked about different technology being reduced, and each time we continue to stack on licensing on top of the last one in an incremental way, that cost base keeps growing without any real improvement of value. And that's where frustration starts to bleed in. A more effective approach is really to treat this as an opportunity to reassess. Instead of accepting what you've been given, you take a step back and decide what your organization actually needs. Again, does everybody need E5? Does everybody need E3? Is there an opportunity to deploy F-plans? Is there an opportunity to use components? Because if you don't start taking a look at that, Microsoft is essentially setting your budget and your strategy for you. And that's clearly not a position that most organizations want to be in. And so that brings us to what I'd characterize as the bigger problem. And that bigger problem really isn't the pricing change. It's really already happening inside most environments today. And so let's simplify those three enterprise tiers. Talked about a bit about them earlier, right? And so just to level set, that E3 is your key productivity and baseline security. This is for most knowledge workers what is actually being used on a day-to-day basis. When you go and augment what is an E5, that adds some security features, compliance features, analytics, and voice capabilities for Teams and PBX. It's very powerful, but only if those features are actually being configured and used. E7 goes a bit beyond that. Bundles in, like I mentioned, Copilot, expanded governance, expanded AI capabilities. These are designed for organizations that are at or near that frontier level. They're scaling AI across the business, and the preponderance of the users are in this space. But here's the reality, right? Like most organizations don't fully use E5, and knowing that, we know that most organizations aren't going to fully use E7 at scale. And so the issue really isn't like what license is better. The issue is whether the capabilities match to what your end users are actually doing today in your environment, right? And in most environments, there is a significant mismatch there. And so, like I said, don't ask what license is best. Ask a different set of questions, right? Start with who your users are, because everyone has a different role. Everybody has a unique need, right? Look at your actual security posture, not what you think it is, but what's actually there today. Define that AI roadmap, specifically which users, which teams, which business units will be using those capabilities for the next, say, 8 to 12 months. You assess what's already deployed, because most organizations are paying for things they already have. And finally, ask what would happen if you change something tomorrow. Because if nothing would break, there's a strong signal that you may be overpaying today. And so, again, as we proceed, right, this is what we call licensing drift, right? This is the legacy licenses that were potentially brought on for a project, brought on for users, and never removed from the enterprise, right? And so everybody has that debt. Every organization does. I'm sure my company does also. Licenses get added, roles change, projects come and go, people come and go, but no one's actually managing the farm and minding that and looking at the environment. So slowly and over time, these environments become misaligned, and that problem compounds, monthly, weekly, quarterly, annually, until someone starts to take a look at that. And that's why the price increase is actually an opportunity, right? It forces that conversation. It forces some of the behaviors and actions that should have happened much earlier, right? But no time like the present to go and do this. We can make a massive impact in your organization today, irrespective of that licensing debt that you may have. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about, get into more specifics. Let's talk about what we see showing up in real environments and really those patterns of overspend. And so when we go into these new environments, we start looking at the CSP licensing estate or other licensing. We see a few commonalities and a few things that are repeated across many organizations, right? Companies lack a clear inventory on what they own. Licenses are assigned broadly without much thought to usage, right? If you have an employee who just left your organization, 90 days ago, and you've hired somebody new, there's an opportunity to make that reassignment without buying new license. But a lot of organizations, just through their own ignorance or ease, go and buy that license, and now you're at a 2x portion where you still have that one employee, but now you got 2 licenses that you're paying. Costs are treated as a fixed expense rather than something that can be optimized. These costs aren't like your home insurance. It is not a static cost. It is something that can move up and down at your renewal cycle, depending on the projects you're working on, depending on the users that you have and what workloads they're actually using, right? And so if this is a new concept to you, or something where you have some baseline understanding but need some help in coaching, these are areas that we can assist with, right? And what I would say is very, very few organizations, it doesn't matter if there are 50 seats, 500 seats, 10,000 seats, or 100,000 employees, all of them are in the same spot. They very few regularly review or adjust licensing based on how their business evolves. And we've seen a number of compelling events and catalysts over the last 5 years. Tremendous opportunity to do so. But if not, you're not buying the 8 ball. Now is a better time than ever. And so, across hundreds of engagements, we see those 5 patterns to underspend, right? Overspend, I should say. Inactive licensing that nobody is using. Duplication of tools. We were paying for the same security twice, or same capability twice. And it was a bit of Freudian slip there. It said security, but Microsoft has made significant investments into the security stack, removing the need for customers to layer on additional third-party security vendors with the Microsoft stack that they have, right? Users, and I spent some time on this, are on the wrong licensing tier. Add-ons that are accumulating over time. Lack of visibility that allows all of this to continue. If you address these 5 areas, you can usually derive and identify meaningful savings in your Microsoft investment. So let's start and drill down in this, right? The first and I'd say easiest area to address is the inactive licenses. These are assigned, like I mentioned a few moments ago, to users who may no longer be active, and whether that's because they left the organization, moved to a different role, potentially were associated to a project that ended, that license remains. And in most organizations, this is an 8 to 15% total spend of your license. That is a significant portion of your budget to get back just by making a few mouse clicks on your Microsoft portal. And because this is just simply pure waste, it is ultimately the quickest way to go and reduce costs. The second is duplicate capabilities. I spoke about that a moment ago. That's what happens when organizations continue to pay for third-party tools that now overlap with what M365 already includes. And so we see things like standalone MFA tools, right? There's separate analytics platforms. There's external compliance systems. Years ago, most companies were looking at specific MDM solutions like Mobile Iron or others, Jamf for Apple devices. Today, Intune can do all of that, right? And that capability has been continued to be invested upon, and these are legitimate tools that can be used enterprise-wide. In many cases, like I mentioned, these tools are brought into organizations before Microsoft made these investments. But when was the last time you started taking a look at the efficacy of these tools that you may have reviewed a few years back and ignored due to a lack of technical features or a lack of confidence in the ability? But make no mistake, that Microsoft stack caught up, and the duplication became more and more prominent. So I'd encourage you all to take a look at that stack and find some of those redundant technologies that you could remove. This one's also really impactful, right? It's the wrong tier per user. This is where users are assigned licensing that doesn't match their needs. You may have users on E5 that only use basic productivity tools. I've seen multiple E5 users in my career that work on a factory floor and use a shared device while snapping widgets together. There's no basis for them to have that level of technology. And by the same time, in the inverse, you may have users who are struggling, who need the tools, who need extra features and don't have access to them, right? That creates a real and present danger to the culture of your organization, not allowing your information workers to have the tools needed to do the job properly. Fourth pattern is add-ons. These are additional licenses attached to users for a specific tool or feature. Oftentimes, where we see this come up is a project or a very specific and short-term acute need at an organization. But what happens is that the project completes, the need expires, the license remains. And so every month or every year or every 3 years, you're paying for that, right? And many people have companies that are very large. If that happens to a subset of users, that compounds and then grows monthly, quarterly, annually, those costs accumulate and create a significant amount of hidden debt that no one is really looking at today in many customers' sites. The fifth and last is that lack of visibility. And I think this is a clear pattern, right? Without those clear insights into who has what and how it's being used, those issues persist and don't go away. Organizations might run a review once a year or on a somewhat occasional basis, but in between those reviews, no one's really looking at it. No one's watching the farm. Those inefficiencies find a way to build back up, and you're back in that same position that you thought you had ameliorated, say, 12 or 18 months ago. And so, again, the problem really isn't identifying the waste. It's that maintenance of visibility so that waste doesn't return, right? It does take someone who can take a look at that. And again, if you don't have that skill or expertise or cycles in your environment, we do. We have teams of people who can go and do this for you and make sure that you're not in a situation as we described across the 5 most high cost vectors. And there's a human element to all this too, right? And that's one thing I want to close on in this part before we move over to the next section of this webinar. But many of the issues we discussed today aren't just purely technical, right? They relate to adoption, to training, to change management. And if users don't understand or they don't trust the tools, they're just not going to use them, right? We're all consumers in our lives. Looking at how we view and leverage technology in our personal lives is a exact analogy to how our information workers are using today, right? If there's a lack of understanding, lack of trust, it's flat out not going to happen. And when those tools aren't used, where people have spent time and money investing into that, either from a pre-purchase or a post-purchase perspective, those licenses become waste. That time that you spent evaluating these tools become an opportunity cost where you could have done something else, right? And so that licensing strategy really needs to include an adoption component at the forefront, and it needs to be thought of as you embark on your licensing journey at whatever stage you're in. So let's shift from problems to solutions, right? That's why we're here. I'm sure this is a common refrain. We've all heard these problems, right? And it's like, Jeff, like, how do I go and solve this? And I think we have a few, great opportunities for you to do some stuff on your own, and a few great opportunities for you to engage Creospark. And so one important mindset shift is understanding that overspending doesn't come from one big mistake. It's many, many, many small decisions over time. It's those misaligned users, the add-ons, the lifecycle changes, the pricing increases, all combined to increase costs gradually, right? And so the goal isn't really to just fix one issue, but it's really to address the system as a whole. And so, again, we can go and group those main drivers of overspend into these categories, right? Misaligned licensing, lifecycle drift, hidden cost, users being in the wrong tier, licensing not adjusted to the people who are moving or leaving, add-ons, not being turned off, and duplication on tools which quietly eliminate, right? And these are significant financial impacts for your organization and ultimately 95% of the others in the exact same shoes that you are. The difference is that you're here today and learning about something you can do about it, right? And there are a few structural reasons why this continues. And first is that, licensing decisions are rarely owned by one team. Typical organization, IT is focused on making sure people have what they need. Finance is focused on controlling the cost. Security is focused on reducing the risk. All of those perspectives are entirely valid. But when those decisions happen independently, the safest default becomes over provisioning. Organizations choose licenses first and then justify them later, instead of looking at how people are actually working and building the licensing strategy from there. Third is that, costs aren't driven only by licensing. It's driven by how licensing is managed. Things like your renewal time, your purchasing structure, the add-ons introduced to your enterprise at time, and the fact that most environments are still being managed manually today, right? There's the lack of automation, there's the lack of AI, there's a lack of time. So without that alignment, that visibility and process, the costs just don't stabilize, they continue to grow. And so in short, the issue persists for a variety of reasons. It's the licensing decisions are split across IT, finance, security, each with their own remits and priorities, leading to over-provisioning as a default, a tendency to choose licenses first and justify the cost later. And finally, many environments are still managed manually, which makes continuous optimization difficult, or in some cases, next to impossible. And so, how are cost savings actually achieved? Organizations that successfully reduce costs take a much different approach than what we characterized earlier. They align licensing to usage rather than to assumptions. They reuse and reharvest existing licenses instead of just simply purchasing new ones. They eliminate duplication across tools. And so when the user base is all in E5, there is a bevy of collab and security tools and compliance tools. Most organizations who are looking to cost save really take a fine-tooth comb and start looking at their CrowdStrikes or their Sophos or any other type of security vendor in there to look at where they can consolidate. And they treat all the renewals as an opportunity to restructure, not just renew, right? Business changes, we all change. How we go to market changes on on a very rapid basis, right? And I would bet dollars to donuts that when you first purchased or renewed your Microsoft agreement, say in 2023, and you're coming up for renewal in 2026, the organization, the people, how you go to market, the business you do is significantly different than when you made those decisions 3 years prior to that. Again, right, talking about these organizations who have built a good practice to have an ongoing notion for cost control, right? they're making this ongoing, as I mentioned, right? It's not a one-time event. They are creating a structure, and Creospark can help with this as well by building this out for you and being the expert to your organization. But there's a cadence of monthly checks where you're looking at inactive licensing, reclaiming and reassigning those unused licenses promptly. New hires are mashed up with offboarding, right? And a license review on what can be moved and changed versus what can be bought new. Moving out, quarterly and getting more strategic, right? Removing some of the unused SKUs, doing a quarterly audit add-on, right? Chances are a project has finished, project may have started, but there could be an opportunity to share those licenses or just simply get rid of them. Copilot agent usage review, right? Those are real costs that people haven't experienced previously, right? It's a different model and important to look at that on a consistent basis. On a biannual, really looking at persona alignment review, right? 6 months before an anniversary day is when customers are really looking at where you can move E3 individuals to E5 or vice versa. Like I said, are users in that right tier? Do we have the right security posture and license mapping? Do we have a security renewal coming up? And what in the Microsoft tech stack to be owned today can replace that, right? Like these are the conversations that organizations who are saving money, not being impacted, are having. And lastly, again, that tier strategy review, that renewal planning, it says 90 days ahead. I would argue it needs to be 6 months, 180 days. And that CSP pricing and term optimization, right? These are all really important. And the one thing I do want to add is that tooling makes all this achievable. We do partner with best of breed organizations from an OEM and ISV perspective. We can provide through those relationships the visibility, the governance, and the partner pricing to make that all happen. So please, please, please don't feel like you're alone on this island. You do have a lot of help and support to navigate forward in this endeavor. And so, in terms of next steps, I told you we get to this, and here we are. Perfect timing. Let's go and make this practical. So here's a few things that you can do coming out of this session, right? First, I would say is like go and pull that inactive license report. You're going to go into your Microsoft 365 Admin Center, take a look at those users with no activity over the last, say, 30 days, 90 days, or if you want to be a little bit more conservative. This is your fastest savings target. You're going to see, in many cases, 8 to 15% and sometimes more there. Look at, secondly, at your top duplicate tools, right? So map those current third-party subscriptions against what's included in M365. You might have some MFA tools, e-discovery platforms, analytics tools, right? Do you really need things like Tableau when you have Power BI that you're paying for? Some people like the tool, some people don't, but there's a duplication of finance and effort there. Third, define those user personas, right? Draft 4 to 6 personas for your organization. A frontline worker, a knowledge worker, a power user, an executive as an example, right? Map each of those to a different tier. You do not need to have the entire enterprise covered on E3 or E5 holistically. You can mix and match and add in F1 and F3 plans and really get to that proper license state. I know it's June 18th today, getting close to the end of the day. There's probably a handful of folks who have a renewal coming up for June 30th, July 1st, given that it is Microsoft's fiscal 26 year end. If you are in this position, please do reach out to me. I would love to hop on the phone with you tomorrow and help walk you through that. There is a very finite window to renew or expand on your current rates. Those 3-year CSP commitments are now available for E3 and E5. And so if you are in this fortunate or unfortunate position, depending on your perspective, there's an opportunity to defray or remove that conversation for the next 3 years. Lastly, book a licensing assessment. We do have the ability to run a full audit of your tenant. We identify savings. We will help you build the business case and manage that renewal. All of these things so you don't have to, right? This is critically important. But each of these steps, regardless of what you do and how you start, begins to move you from awareness to action, which is what we're trying to encourage today, right? And who should lead this conversation? Like I said at the earlier stages of this call, right? Really important to recognize that it's not owned by one team. And I think that's where many organizations, get to a spot that becomes unmanageable, right? Certainly IT focused on enablement, finance focused on cost, security focused on risk. But to do this properly and to really get to that end of job and do things for your organization that make financial and economic sense is that all three of these perspectives need to be aligned. And where there's misalignment, that's where waste occurs and occurs rapidly. And here's how we support your clients. I've thrown in a few teasers about Creospark, but this is where we do and where we step in, right? We can help you optimize what you already have. We can help you structure how licenses are purchased and provide recommendations and guidance for that. Help right size by persona and provide expert advice and guidance. Audit and add-on removals we absolutely can do, right? The ongoing management to keep everything aligned, areas that we can absolutely assist. And this combination between, the work that you do on your end and bringing in a partner like Creospark is really what drives that sustainable cost savings and future-proofs your organization for, other types of price increases or events like this that really require you to stop and think. All right. So getting to the end, home stretch now. If there's one key takeaway, it's this, right? Don't wait for the renewal. You have a window right now to take action before some of these changes hit, if you're in that position today. If you're not, you still have an opportunity to do many of the things that we discussed in the preceding slides, right? But our recommendation really is to start with an assessment, start identifying those savings, and start identifying that right structure going forward, right? Like plan the work and work the plan. That way you're making decisions proactively and not reactively. And that's one thing that we want to change, that we find a lot of customers are very reactive to what's going on in the Microsoft world. Like, you need to take that ball by the horns and get after it. And if you don't have those skills and expertise, again, an area that we can help provide some consultative guidance for you and ultimately get you to where you need. And to summarize here, right? Prices are going up July 1. That is clear as day. Everybody knows that. What else we know is that many organizations are overpaying today, right? Like I said, inactive licensing, wrong tiers, duplication in tools. That's universal. That's not a you problem. That is an everybody problem. They just need to be uncovered, and they need some time to focus on that. Licensing is an operation model decision, right? It's strategic. It's not, hey, how many licenses you need? Let's just go buy them. Take a second and think about what else you have in your organization, third-party tools, the add-ons. How can Microsoft defray or eliminate some of those costs? Copilot and AI change the math, right? It changes how licensing works. There's different plans for different programs. Does everybody need a full Copilot seat? I'd argue no. Agents serve many users, but have a conversation before you scale and before you start over drinking that Kool-Aid, and making sure that you're making the right decision for your organization. Lastly, and I'd say, more importantly, is the one way to stand out is to manage this continuously, right? The licensing event isn't a point in time when the bill comes in. It is a concerted effort by your internal teams across departments, by your partners with Microsoft. Help build that cadence to get your licensing optimized, right? All year long, the organizations that focus on this are the ones that are least impacted by events like price increases and other such changes to the licensing schemas. So resources, again, we're going to send all the slides. We're going to send all the collateral. You will have all of this. We do have breakdowns and webinars of, E7 holistically, taking a look at E3, E5, and E7 and helping determine what the right plan for your business is. Blogs about whether or not it's the right time to invest in a 365 upgrade, how to optimize your renewal, and a customer-driven checklist for you. So all these tools, all these assets will be provided to you within a day or two of this call today. Please do take a look through that. There's some great information there, great content from our webinars. But again, we're a phone call away, an email away. If you get stuck, if you need help, we are here for you, right? And so at this point, I just want to take a pause, open up some questions. Obviously, very valuable discussion to have. And so feel free to bring those forward. I'll just pause for a minute while we pull those up.
Hey, Jeff, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. One is a question around what about business premium versus E3, E5, and E7?
Yeah, business premium is effectively a mix between E3 and E5. So it is more closely relating to E5 than it is to anything else. The difference between business premium and E5 is less about the technology and where the seat size is at. So business premium can be bought for organizations that have up to 300 users. After you have 300 users, you need to then move into the enterprise plan, so your E3 and E5. I do have a great breakdown that I can send that will compare on a grid and matrix, all of the features that exist in all of the enterprise suites versus those in the B suites. There are a lot of features in all of those, and so at the risk of running this webinar an hour and a half long, I will add that to our package for our marketing team and send that URL out that breaks that down for you.
So, second question was, I normally get invoice at the end of the calendar year. Is this changing?
The invoice structure is really dependent on the agreement that you buy, right? And so for individuals who are on an enterprise agreement, they get an annual invoice with a true-up period. For those in a CSP, it depends. There's annual commits, there's tri-annual commits, there's monthly commits. And so without fully understanding what licensing agreement is supporting those licensing, it's a very difficult question to answer. But what I can say to you is that no, by way of the timing or the changes that Microsoft has introduced, there are no changes to the frequency of invoicing. The frequency of invoicing is based on the agreement in which you put down. Any other questions, Kunal?
We just had one come in. I remember we used to be able to reduce seats and add seats on a monthly basis. Now it's annual. Did it change?
Depends on the agreement that you bought. If you have bought an annual commitment on a CSP, you have rights to reduce on an annual basis. If you have bought a monthly commitment, and there is a additional cost driver on the monthly commitment, I believe it's 15 to 20% more than the annual, that would allow you to decrease or increase on a monthly basis. So again, depends largely on the agreement that you bought. But if there is a specific situation or you have questions about your agreement, we're obviously more than happy to answer. I have availability throughout next week, Tuesday through Friday. Happy to book time with anyone to go through your specific situation. Anything else, team? All right.
Yeah, I think we can go on.
All right. Thanks, Canal. Thanks for the questions as well. All right. So if today was about reducing cost, our next week is really about making sure the tools you're investing in actually deliver value. And so, we're talking about Copilot and why most organizations don't get value from it, not because of the tool, but because of how their content and intranet are structured. And so, if you're thinking about Copilot, looks like the date's wrong. We will be running a webinar on that later on in July. I believe that should be July 25th. And so we'll make sure that's corrected as we have follow-up. But another great session.
Sorry, Jeff. It is
pardon me.
next
It
week.
is the 25th. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Canal. Thank you. Yes. And so this is a webinar with Fresh. And so Fresh is a great partner of Creospark, helping with SharePoint internet sites, making them more user-friendly, adding AI tools to it, and ultimately helping drive more intent and information on your internet. And so Canal's right. That's my mistake. I guess I've done too many webinars and have lost track of time. But that is June 25th at 2 o'clock. If you don't have access to this, our website does have all the details. And again, you'll have all the collateral today where you can go and click to sign up for this. Thanks for the correction there, Canal. Appreciate that. Lastly, and I'll leave this here for a moment, our feedback is really important, right? It helps us make these sessions more relevant for you. I appreciate that you've all taken, the better part of 50 minutes out of your Thursday afternoon today when you could be doing other things. So thank you for spending part of that time with us. We want to make sure that these sessions continue to be valid and impactful for you. Please do scan that QR code on your screen there. Provide any feedback. Survey is pretty quick. All those who do complete it will be entered in a draw for a $50 Amazon gift card, which we will announce following the completion of the dissemination of the information following the webinar. Amazing. And that's it. That concludes our time for today. Again, heartfelt thank you for taking the time of your day and joining us. Really appreciate it. Great questions as well. If you do have specific questions that you would like to address, speaking specific to your environment, let's go and sign an NDA. Let's have that conversation and let's get you on the right foot. But please do keep an eye on your inbox. The recording will be sent. All the follow-up materials will be sent, inclusive of the grid that will show E3, E5, and the B plans. But ultimately, we look forward to continuing this conversation. We do have a whole host of webinars and other customer material. Please do check out our website. You'll find a bevy of great information to help get you situated and hopefully add value to your organization. But again, thank you for joining. Wish you all a wonderful afternoon and evening, and look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.